From WNIN News, this is the Friday Wrap. I'm John Gibson. On today's show, we welcome Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press to talk about the issue of opioid settlement funds. WNIN's Tim Jagalow will be along to look at the EVSC's new budget. Our Kenton McDonald speaks with two local teens about their one-night-only show at the Arts Council. Jevin Redmond will join us for the Sports Chat, and we'll run down the Weekend Notebook. The Friday Wrap is next on WNIN FM with support from Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations following the news from NPR. It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. Well, the Evansville City Council this week approved the distribution of about $1.2 million in federal opioid settlement funds. The council voted 7-1 to go along with a mayor's committee's recommendation for 6 local nonprofits to share the money. The distribution raised some concerns about possible conflicts of interest and what some felt was an oversight by leaving at least one local group out of the mix. Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press has been covering all of this and joins me now. Sarah, as always, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, let's first start off with the basics. What 6 agencies were chosen to share this money? I believe it begins with the YWCA of Evansville, right?
Yes. So the YWCA, the Evansville Rescue Mission, the Evansville Police Department, Vanderburgh County Mental Health Court, the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office, and the Deaconess Women's Hospital were the groups that the mayor's office recommended as a part of the allocation of opioid settlement funds this year.
Yes, and as I mentioned, the council voted 7-1 to go along with that committee's recommendation. There was one city council member who voted against the distribution, and that was Courtney Johnson, correct?
Yes. So Courtney Johnson, who is a Democrat at-large member of the city council, ultimately voted no after some conversation, essentially stating that he had too many questions to feel comfortable voting at this point. And Paul Green, who is also an at-large member of council, he was not present at the meeting, so that's why it's a 7-1 instead of a however else it would end up for the 9 people. But
exactly.
All of the other members did vote yes. There were some who had some caveats to their yeses, some had some hesitation to their yeses, but ultimately it did pass with that 7-1 vote.
All right, well, let's talk about some of those caveats, some of those concerns that were raised by even the councilors who voted for it. As we mentioned, 7 voted for it. What were some of those concerns?
So one of the major concerns came from Missy Mosby, the Democrat representing the 2nd Ward. She mentioned that she's been getting a lot of calls and messages and emails from constituents since it was announced what organizations were to receive the money. So that came at the first city council meeting about 2 weeks ago, when it was up for first reading. Yeah. So about 2 weeks that they've been able to sit and listen to constituents who came to them with issues. One of the major ones that she'd heard were constituents who had issue with the Women's Hospital receiving funding. So the Women's Hospital is located in Warwick County, so it's
part of the Gateway complex.
Yes. Right. So it is not in the city limits, it's not in the county limits, and so there were some concerns about funding going to an organization that isn't represented by the city council that was going to be voting for it. And that wasn't even in the county. And so the city did address this. They said that they felt it was appropriate because the Women's Hospital employs and treats a lot of Vanderburgh County and Evansville residents, which is true. There's not an argument to be made there. But there were still some concerns about whether or not funding that was meant to be helping Vanderburgh County and Evansville should have been used for an outside entity, especially with Warwick County and many of its individual cities, Newburgh, Boonville, getting opioid settlement funds of their own.
Right. The Warwick County got their own funds, and I guess there's an argument to be made that they should use their funds for that hospital. Yeah. Well, what were some of the other concerns that folks raised before we get into who was perhaps left out of the
So
situation?
it leads right into that, actually, with Missy Mosby again, as well as Mary Allen, who's a Democrat at large representative on the council. Both also expressed some concern that they had heard from constituents, as well as that they had personally, about perhaps grassroots organizations not being in the funding barrel at the end of the day. One of those being Evansville Recovery Alliance, which received a lot of support from members of the public after the announcement was made.
That they would not be.
That they were not among the recipients. When those were posted on Facebook, the comments essentially were all filled with people questioning why Evansville Recovery Alliance was not included. And that was one of the concerns expressed from council for people who did vote yes but had those concerns about the way it all ended up. They did express that organizations like Evansville Recovery Alliance, who don't have major funding sources already, whereas places like the Women's Hospital is a major corporation, and places like EPD and the Sheriff's Office with taxpayer funding, as well as, personalized grants for law enforcement that are out there for these sorts of issues.
So yes, so a variety of issues there. We're speaking with Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can see her work at courierpress.com. I'm John Gibson. This is the Friday Wrap. Well, now, Sarah, before the action that was taken this week by the council, you wrote a story regarding the fact that 4 of the 6 groups chosen for this opioid settlement money had connections to a member of the committee. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that? Who basically was connected to these groups that inevitably got the funding?
Sure. So the city put together a committee this year which would review the applications that they got from organizations looking to receive settlement funding. On that committee, there were multiple members who had connections to the groups that ended up receiving the dollars. So the committee's job was to go through those applications and then give their recommendations to the mayor, who ultimately did make the final decision. And so those connections, some of them were, very simple. Nathan Hassler, who's the assistant chief of police for EPD, was on the committee, and EPD is receiving dollars. Vanderburgh County Mental Health Court is housed within Superior Court. Judge Wayne Trockman was on the committee. He is a Superior Court judge. The Women's Hospital had a couple connections, including a woman who actually did not participate in the committee meetings, but was a part of putting together the qualifications for people to submit their applications. And then there was a practitioner on the committee who had connections to the YWCA through board appointment and through Deaconess, and had an individual connection with the deputy mayor through a nonprofit that she is involved in. And so there were quite a few organizations that the public ended up having some concerns about, favoritism, things like that. In general, I think the public found it just not to look good with so many organizations having a member on the committee who could have acted a little more for them than others.
So what was Mayor Terry's response to all of this? As you say, she ultimately went ahead with those 6. What has been her reaction to the concerns that have been raised?
Sure. So Mayor Stephanie Terry's office did essentially say that from the beginning, when they were putting the committee together, they seemed to go in with the understanding that to have a board who knew what they were talking about, they would need to get some members who had organizations that may be submitting applications for the dollars. And in some of those instances, for members of the committee who did participate in the committee hearings, the mayor's office did say that they did not participate in conversation when their entity was up for discussion.
I see.
But they were also not asked to leave the room or not be there that day. So essentially the understanding would be that they sat there quietly during the conversation about their organization.
I see. Well, how did this process compare to, say, last year's process? I understand that's also something that was brought up in the meeting, right?
Sure, yeah. So while there were these issues and concerns from the public as well as council, there was a sense of understanding that it was an improvement from last year. So under, this is Stephanie Terry's first year as mayor, and so last year, under former Mayor Lloyd Winnicky, there were 2 organizations selected, Youth First and Forefront Therapy, who received opioid settlement funds without there being a committee or a process in place. So there was no public request for proposals, and that drew a lot of questions from the public, as well as some of these other organizations like Evansville Recovery Alliance, who also applied for funding last year through reaching out to the mayor directly, since there was no public application process. So members of council did thank Stephanie Terry's administration for creating a committee, creating a public application process, doing these things that attempted to bring it a little more into the light for the public to see how the process went. But ultimately there were, still some issues that they'd like to address going forward into another year of allocations for 2025.
Yeah. So as you say, I mean, at least some members of the council thought this was an improvement over last year. Maybe I'm sure there are folks out there who thought the Winnicky administration did a fine job, but just to make that clear. But so I guess that kind of opens up the question about next year's process. Well, before we get to next year, is there still more to come in this year's process?
So as far as the decision is made. So the council did vote to allocate the money, which means the mayor's office now can start contract applications or the contract process, for these organizations that were selected. So while there won't be any changes to what was decided by council and then ultimately the mayor's office, there is an expectation that the council is looking to hear more from those 2 organizations from last year that were awarded dollars under the Winnicky administration to see how that money was spent. They'd like essentially a presentation likely at City Council again in the public that anyone can come and listen to. And then that leads into that the organizations from this year that were given money will be expected to do that same thing, about a year after to see how they use those funds or are using those dollars.
Right. So the process for next year, it sounds like the council just wants to know more about what was done this year before they decide on next year's.
Yeah, and I think also Mayor Stephanie Terry did address some of these issues. She noted that they worked to make this a fair and transparent process this year, and in doing that, maybe it wasn't 100% perfect. And so her office has said that they are already working on taking some of this feedback that they've received and trying to work it into the process for 2025. I believe that the application process for money in 2025 will start in January. So we aren't that far away from it in the grand scheme of things, and somehow. And so I think that they're trying to, maybe look at how the committee is made up, some of those things that drew direct response from the community. Yeah,
that drew some attention this time. So, and as far as how much money will be available next year, will it be comparable to this? Does Mayor Terry know anything along those lines?
Yeah, so for next year, they are looking at probably about $1.06 million. Again, just about, it's a little bit less than this go around, but not anything too much of a difference. So I think with the settlement funds, it is the understanding that the allocations will be fairly similar in size, potentially until they get to that end point when it's whatever's left over. But they had, I believe it was 22 applications in total this year for the money, and those 6 were selected. The Courier and Press has filed a public access request for all of the applications to see essentially who didn't get funding and sort of what those applications looked like. We haven't received those documents yet, but we also haven't received a refusal for documents. So we're hopeful that in the coming days we'll also have some more information in that regard.
We'll certainly keep an eye on that. So perhaps we should go back a little further here. The opioid settlement, obviously this was a large federal program that provides funding for counties and communities all across the country. So essentially, what does the federal government want communities to do with this money?
Sure. So it is, a fairly complicated process in terms of it being a federal grant. It came from, I think it was about $54 billion, the settlement in total, a federal settlement that came with manufacturers and distributors of opioids. So in this, the city essentially said, yes, we want to be we want to be a part of this lawsuit, so we will get some settlement dollars from it. And in that, the federal government, I believe along with Johns Hopkins, has laid out some criteria, some, things that should maybe be top of focus for cities when they're looking at this. One of those things is Narcan distribution, which is not included in any of the things the city put forth this year. And that was another concern directly kind of related to, again, those grassroots groups like Evansville Recovery Alliance that's a major part of what they do, is making Narcan available in the community. So they have essentially a list of things that are approved uses, and there are restricted and unrestricted funds that go along with this. So the restricted funds have really specific criteria of what sort of organizations and work can be used for them, and the unrestricted is a little bit looser as far as how that can be used. But as far as any potential changes to the recommendations and criteria, I believe when we're looking into 2025 that those will be the same. So it'll be, again, kind of, the public can look into what those criteria are and see their personal opinions on which ones fall into that and which ones don't. And again, voice those at city council meetings, to the mayor's office, that sort of thing, as the process continues.
Yeah, all right. Well, that process will continue. As you mentioned, when we get into federal funding, it can get pretty complicated.
Yes, it can.
But I guess the overall goal, of course, is to help these agencies who are helping these people who are impacted by the opioid crisis and essentially save lives and change lives, I guess, is the final goal. Well, Sarah, anything else to add that we haven't touched on here?
I don't think so. Just that, like I mentioned with those potential presentations at council, that's something the Courier will be following. And again, with our public records request that we have outstanding with the city, hopefully we'll have some information coming from that in the future.
Yes, indeed. That is Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can read her stories at courierpress.com. And as she mentioned, lots of updates to come. Sarah, as always, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Good to have you here. All right, well, coming up on the Friday Wrap, WNIN's Tim Jagalow will be along. He'll talk about the budget that was approved this past week by the Evansville Vanderburg School Corporation. That's straight ahead on the Friday Wrap. I'm John Gibson. Hope you can stay with us.
Bags packed, possessions sold, and the trip of a lifetime begins right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm David James, and on 2 Main Street, Joe Ellsworth shares his great adventure. 28 countries in 28 months, deserts, jungles, and unforgettable characters like the goat farmer who tried to buy Joe's traveling companion. 2 Main Street airs Thursday at noon, Saturday at 11, presented by Jeffrey Berger, Kim Wren, and the Berger Wealth Team at Bayard Private Wealth Management.
I'm Maria Hinojosa, this week on Latino USA. The story of the first registered Mexican-American Holocaust survivor.
If you look at my dad in those years, you could not tell he had gone through anything that was extreme in nature because he hid his PTSD so well.
That's this week on Latino USA.
She grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. He went to North High in Evansville. They met in Sandpoint, Alaska on the Aleutian Islands and moved to Posey County to start a farm. I'm Peggy Pirro, inviting you to meet Nate and Emily Julian of Earthrise Permaculture Farm on the latest episode of the Food From Here podcast. Brought to you by Swerka and More and their intergenerational community garden partnership with Young and Established.
In 1954, pianist Bud Powell turned 30, and the damage of hospitalizations, an excessive work schedule, and other strains and traumas of recent years began to take a toll on his playing. For the last 12 years of his life, Powell would be intermittently brilliant, and we'll hear some of those musical moments, along with commentary from Powell biographer Peter Pullman on The Scene Changes, The Life and Music of Bud Powell, Part 2, this week on Nightlights.
Support for WNIN comes from listeners like you and from Junior Achievement of Southwestern Indiana, promoting economic empowerment through education, preparing students for the future. More information online at swindiana.ja.org. Indiana State Teachers Association, sponsors of PBS Learning Media, which gives educators free curriculum-aligned videos, interactives, lesson plans, and more. Learn more at pbslearningmedia.org.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Good to have you along on this Friday. Well, the 2025 Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation budget is more than $319 million. This year's budget was balanced without drama or layoffs, and as WNIN's Tim Jagalow reports, Indiana's voucher system remains a big concern to the district.
At the Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation, staffing normally takes up 98% of education funds from the state. This recently passed 2025 budget includes a $3,000 raise for all certified teachers and a 4% increase for non-certified staff. Assistant Superintendent Carl Underwood says school districts are receiving more funding from the state in 2025.
Yeah, so the big change is the fact that the state picked up the expense for curriculum resources. And in doing so, they provided revenue to all school districts to fund that expense.
Which is going into the education fund, lowering that percentage to about 96%. Overall, Evansville Teachers Association President Lori Young is happy with the budget.
Overall, I think the EVSC did a nice job with those limitations placed on the state, with having basically three different types of education systems.
Such as the private school voucher system, which the EVSC and the ETA are not happy with.
It's taking a huge chunk of money from all of our public schools here in Indiana, and I am amazed that the legislators would think that that is okay, considering most of them went to public schools.
EVSC spokesperson Jason Wibkenberg says without vouchers, public school teachers could receive even higher raises, while he says only 7% of students attend private schools in Indiana.
That makes it very challenging to have the funds that you need to continue to stay competitive with wages, salaries, benefits for your employees.
The advertised budget is more than $319 million, balanced without drama or layoffs. However, the elementary and secondary school emergency relief, or ESSER funds, given during the pandemic are ending. It took planning to maintain programs and avoid a budgetary cliff, says Executive Director of Finance and Business Affairs, Courtney Boliber.
So we have been planning for years of this money when it comes off, what we can do to sustain the programs that we've brought in with ESSER money and how that will affect our budget.
Programs like full-time nursing staff.
Because what happened with schools, you're going to start seeing schools really fall off, we call it financial cliff, where they didn't plan for this.
For WNIN News, I'm Tim Jagalow.
And Tim joins me now here in the studio. Tim, as always, good to have you on.
Hey, John.
Well, speaking of planning, and I know that was part of the voices we just heard there, when does the next budget planning session begin?
Very soon.
Yeah?
Yeah, it starts almost right away. Like they'll start working on 2026 in the next couple months,
Wow.
Says Carl Underwood.
Mhm.
And, that will include meeting with staff and department heads to discern the needs that they have and also how they can continue to, push and bolster student achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Also, of course, the General Assembly is a big important factor. They have to wait until the spring to see how that shakes out,
Right.
what the funding is going to be. And do they do is it per pupil funding in Indiana?
I believe that's what it's based on. But this next session, of course, is the budget session for a state budget as well. So yes, it will be. As far as the particulars, we'll see how it all shakes down. But yes, the legislators go back to Indianapolis in January.
That's one thing I forgot to look up was because in my coverage in Michigan, it was all about per pupil funding, and I don't know if Indiana does it the same way.
I don't know that it's exactly the same way, but we'll look into that a little more as the session gets started for sure.
Yeah, and of course once that's all decided, Superintendent Dave Smith will also be appraised of or be informed of what those numbers are and how that could affect what they get to do in the next budget year.
Sure. Now it does sound like everybody was generally satisfied with the budget. Any more details on this local budget that you can touch on here?
I'll try to avoid number soup.
Right.
That's what it kind of is. School budgets are very, very complex, and you could almost have an entire beat just covering schools and their budgets.
Sure.
Because there's so much that goes into it, so much tied to every dollar that they get. But again, I said $319 million overall was the advertised budget, and that's not. They've said that advertised means that's what they're saying that they could spend. They likely will not spend that much. The same thing with like their bus funding. They have $12.5 million earmarked for bus replacement, which they get to do every 5 years.
Right.
They do not expect to spend $12.5 million on buses. They've got nearly $11 million in their rainy day fund, which is just funding that they've got in their fund that just says, hey, can we use this on a rainy day fund if we need to?
Right.
But it's not really sitting in its own bank account, so to speak. We can't.
And I guess we should point out today is a rainy day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that something's going to shake there with the EVSE.
Right, unless like a roof blows off or something, and God forbid.
Yes,
one report said $42 million for operations. There's $174 million for education funds, and that's mostly salaries. And again, their big highlight was the wage increases for everyone in their district. Challenges going forward are just, again, keeping salaries competitive, but that's kind of based on the General Assembly. And other challenges, of course, are the ESSER funds that they're going to be spending by the end of this year.
Yeah. Now, for the EVSE budget, were there any cuts, in this year's budget?
The short answer is not really. I mean, I always ask about them because when I used to cover school budgets, starting when I was a newer reporter, that was just after the crash, after the recession, and budget cuts were just they were everywhere. I remember one assistant superintendent for the school district saying, "Hey, we already sold the bones. We can't sell anything else. We're down to like the minimum here." The short answer is no, and that's a good thing. I mean, I talked to Laura Young about this. Like, when's the last time there was like a rocky, difficult budget session? And she said it's been a long, long time, since they've had to lay anybody off. And EVSE credits EVSE with just careful planning, long-term planning, careful budgeting for facilities. It's part of their strategy to make sure that it's basically like a boring session every time, that there's nothing really surprising or dramatic happening. And that goes into the planning and the collaboration between all those administrators.
Right. Well, you mentioned vouchers. Why are they such an important topic among the EVSE?
Both parties brought that up to me unprompted, I believe. Both the EVSE and the Evansville Teachers Association with Laura Young both brought up vouchers to me. And it's because this last year is the first year that nearly all students in Indiana have the voucher available to them, which allows them to attend a private school, but it's using state money to attend a private school. That figure was $439 million, according to Indiana Public Radio, that was spent on allowing 70,000 students attend private schools, a 31% increase over the previous session. So this is concerning to them because that's $439 million that was not spent on public schools. I don't know where Jason Wibkenberg got this. I wasn't able to find this figure, but he said every teacher in Indiana could get a $10,000 raise if it weren't for that amount of spending. And he was referring to public schools. So, in talking to Laura Young about them, she said she initially supported them, but they've now grown to the point where almost everybody can go to a private school, or it has that availability, even though most students go to a public school still.
Right. And I can tell you, too, obviously the gubernatorial candidates here in Indiana, Mike Braun is a big supporter of vouchers. He wants to have a universal voucher system, basically, for folks going to private schools. As you might imagine, the Democratic candidates are not big fans of private schools or the voucher system allowing so many students to go to private schools. So I guess, what is the next step? Anything else to add there, Tim, regarding the Evansville-Vanderburgh school budget?
Well, they're just gonna start getting information on what their staff needs and wants for the next school year, and they have to wait for the General Assembly to come back with what their education fund's going to be.
Yeah, to do their thing. All right, that is WNIN's Tim Jagalow. Tim, as always, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Coming up on the Friday Wrap, WNIN's Kenton McDonald speaks with a couple of local teenagers about an art project that they will be showing at the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana tonight. That is straight ahead on the Friday Wrap. I'm John Gibson. Hope you can stay with us.
WNIN listeners are business leaders in the community. They're business owners, managers, decision makers, and influencers. Hi, I'm Laura Porter, WNIN's Underwriting Account Executive. Learn how your message can reach that valuable audience. Visit WNIN.org, click on the Support tab, and then select Corporate Support. Or email me at lporter@wnin.org.
On the next Radio Lab,
here is a story as patriotic as the red, white, and blue.
we look at the past and the future of the First Amendment.
Pretty dismissive of free speech.
The answer is more speech, not less.
The rights of a listener, not just the rights of a speaker.
The whole point of free speech is not that, we've got free speech, now democracy is easy. No, democracy is hard. We don't win the game.
That's on the next Radio Lab. On All Things Considered, the world is brought to your car radio, smart speaker, and mobile phone. Hi, I'm Kenton McDonald, your local All Things Considered host on 88.3 WNIN. As we spend our afternoons together, enjoy local news, statewide news from Indiana Public Broadcasting, and national and international news from NPR. Join me Monday through Friday, 3 to 7, and thanks for your support.
She grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. He went to North High in Evansville. They met in Sandpoint, Alaska on the Aleutian Islands and moved to Posey County to start a farm. I'm Peggy Pirro, inviting you to meet Nate and Emily Julian of Earthrise Permaculture Farm on the latest episode of the Food From Here podcast. Brought to you by Swerka and More and their intergenerational community garden partnership with Young and Established. Support for WNIN comes from listeners like you and from Woods & Woods, an Evansville law firm representing veterans nationwide in their VA disability appeals. Woods & Woods is also the Tour of Honor sponsor for the 10th Annual Honor Flight of Southern Indiana. Information at theveteransfirm.com. The Indiana Secretary of State's office reminding eligible Hoosiers that the deadline to register to vote or update registration is October 7th. Both can be done online at indianavoters.com.
It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Good to have you along. Well, cousins Christian Schmitz and Ethan Douglas are the art duo known as Baggy Jeans. That's jeans spelled G-E-N-E-S. Their one-night-only show at the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana is a deep dive, as they say, into the minds of their 13-year-old selves. WNIN's Kenton McDonald spoke with Christian and Ethan about their show and learns the story behind Baggy Jeans.
I can start. I actually
came up with it, so.
I actually did come up with the name. So it was about a year and a half ago for our first show. We were struggling on finding a name. We went through a bunch of really, really like cheesy, they just didn't make sense. They were all really stupid sounding, but we wanted to play off the idea of something about like our style and us being cousins, us being family. And we went through a lot of rough ideas. But I had an epiphany. It was like 2 a.m. I was laying in bed and I was just thinking about our clothes. I was like, we love wearing baggy jeans. And then it just clicked. And it's a lot more simple and it's kind of dumb in a way. It's not a crazy story, but it was an epiphany. It was a moment.
It's genes, G-E-N-E-S.
Yeah, genetics.
Because
genes.
you're related.
Because we're related, because we're cousins. So that was the birth of the name.
So Ethan, tell me about the aesthetic of your art collaboration with Christian. What does it look like?
Well, for me, I do a lot of photography. I mean, Christian does too. But I feel like a lot of my art is very posed, very like bright, overexposed photos, and Christian's is more loose and in the moment. So I feel like we just complement each other well. So
you guys also have art, or your art is beyond photographs and things. It's more physical art, 3D art, right?
Yeah. I dive really far into the mixed media side of art. Ethan's are mostly photos. He has a couple paintings that he made for this upcoming show. It's kind of just hopefully too. Yeah, he's wearing. But yeah, with my art, it's very mixed media. Whatever I can get my hands on, I enjoy. It is a lot of photography, but it's mixed with painting, screen printing, spray paint. Okay. I've been messing around with woodcut sculptures. It's just kind of, I'd say like cartoonesque illustration is what I like to mix with surreal portraiture. That's some fancy wording, way above my pay grade to say these words. But
you guys are local.
We are,
and I will say this: you guys are young.
You're
early 20s.
23.
Is this a pretty quick rise to have your own art installation or art show? In this area,
I feel like from the outside, yeah, but it also is just like we kind of just wanted to do it, so it doesn't really feel like a rise or anything. It's just kind of like we just asked, and a lot of things were just kind of given to us too, like places and like people helping us with like sets and places we've done photos, places we've hung posters, people being in the photos.
Yeah,
it's all just kind of worked together. I guess.
It just everything fell into place so perfectly, and it was one of those things that we had an idea. And I was inspired to showcase our work in some way because I didn't feel like anybody was doing that in Evansville. Like people they were in community shows, they were doing things for, the Arts Council is amazing, Arts Win, they were doing things with them, but nobody was like just renting out a space and showing their work to their friends. And we wanted to do that in a way, and we were just set on doing it. We wanted a reason to make things more than like, yeah, it'd be cool if our family showed up, or like 20 friends would be really sick, but we just wanted a reason to make stuff for like 8 months.
The Baggy Jeans Early Days show is tomorrow evening, Saturday, September 28th, from 7 to 10 p.m. at the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana on Main Street here in downtown Evansville. Coming up on the Friday Wrap, it's the Sports Chat. Hope you can stick around.
Bags packed, possessions sold, and the trip of a lifetime begins right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm David James, and on 2 Main Street, Joe Ellsworth shares his great adventure. 28 countries in 28 months, deserts, jungles, and unforgettable characters like the goat farmer who tried to buy Joe's traveling companion. 2 Main Street airs Thursday at noon, Saturday at 11, presented by Jeffrey Berger, Kim Wren, and the Berger Wealth Team at Bayard Private Wealth Management.
WNIN listeners are civic leaders serving on nonprofit boards and committees, and they're engaged in the community. Hi, I'm Laura Porter, WNIN's underwriting account executive. Learn how your message can reach that valuable audience. Visit WNIN.org, click on the support tab, and then select corporate support. Or email me at lporter@wnin.org.
Autumn in New York.
The leaves are changing from green to red. The air outside is brisk and cool. Autumn is upon us. And that means it's the time of year for Afterglow to salute some of the best songs about the fall from the Great American Songbook. I'm Mark Chilla, and join me for Songs of the Season, Autumn, this week on Afterglow.
On the next Radio Lab,
Here is a story as patriotic as the red, white, and blue.
we look at the past and the future of the First Amendment.
Pretty dismissive of free speech.
The answer is more speech, not less.
The rights of a listener, not just the rights of a speaker.
The whole point of free speech is not that, oh, we've got free speech, now democracy is easy. No, democracy is hard. We don't win the game.
That's on the next Radio Lab.
This is the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson, and joining me now is Jevin Redman with this week's Sports Chat. Jevin, good to have you back, as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, it's looking like a soggy Week 6 in high school football. I understand there's been a major schedule change, right?
There has been. So all SIAC football games have been pushed to Saturday. Some have not determined the start time just yet, so that'll come out later in the afternoon for all the games. But yeah, all SIAC games are pushed to Saturday. As far as other games throughout the tri-state, from what I've been told, it's kind of hit and miss. Some are postponed to Saturday. Some are still trying to play tonight. So just stay tuned if you're interested in going to a game tonight, yeah.
Yes, indeed. But as you mentioned, all the SIAC games moved to tomorrow night due to the rain and the high winds from the remnants of the hurricane. Well, yeah, certainly a big time for high school football, but also some news about college basketball, right?
Yeah, so several things on the local front. We'll start with Evansville men's basketball. The full schedule was released with the conference slate earlier in the week. So Evansville, they'll open up November 5th at North Texas. And just some highlights with their schedule. This year they play at Ohio State November 19th. They're home against Western Kentucky on December 7th, which will be a fun matchup. At Ball State on December 21st. Then conference play gets underway late December. But official practice started for college basketball for both USI and UE, men's and women's, on Tuesday. So they're in, full preparation, getting ready for the season, and should be a fun year on both sides of town.
Yes, indeed. Also, speaking of college basketball, I understand there's an area standout who is signed with IU. Is that right?
Yeah, so Trent Sisley, he's a Santa Claus native, went to Heritage Hills High School. He committed to IU on Tuesday, posted that to social media, and he took an official visit last weekend with Mike Woodson, the IU men's basketball head coach, and then committed on Tuesday. But it was really between IU and Purdue. There was a few other schools in the mix, Iowa, Michigan State, and Notre Dame. But Trent Sisley, who was a 4-star recruit, he's 70th in his class, and he's actually going to a prep school in Florida for his senior year to get ready for college basketball, Montverde, which is in Florida. So Trent Sisley, who played 3 years at Heritage Hills, he's at Montverde in Florida now. He's going to IU to play for the Hoosiers.
And I'm sure the Hoosier fans will not hold that over the Boilermaker fans at all, that they got him. Well, one more thing while we've got you, Jevin. A big passing recently of a a former standout athlete, really even a present-day standout athlete in Evansville, right?
Yeah, really sad news on Sunday. Clint Keon passed away. He was involved in a single car accident. He was traveling home from a golf tournament. It happened in Crawford County, Illinois, and Clint passed away on Sunday. There was also a passenger in the vehicle, Matthew Redd. He is in intensive care in the hospital right now, but just really sad news. I mean, we speak from a sports perspective a lot. He was a great athlete at Memorial and went on to play college athletics. He was on the Aces basketball team for a short time under head coach Jim Cruz, but he was really dedicated to mentoring and coaching young athletes. He was very involved in the Boys and Girls Club, dedicated to faith in the community. So it was a really tragic loss and a big loss for Evansville, the city.
Yes, indeed. That is Jevin Redmond. As always, Jevin, thank you so much for the sports chat.
Sure. Thanks, John.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Coming up on the Friday wrap, it's the Weekend Notebook. That's coming up in just a moment on WNIN FM.
She grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. He went to North High in Evansville. They met in Sandpoint, Alaska on the Aleutian Islands and moved to Posey County to start a farm. I'm Peggy Pirro, inviting you to meet Nate and Emily Julian of Earthrise Permaculture Farm on the latest episode of the Food From Here podcast. Brought to you by Swerka and More and their intergenerational community garden partnership with Young and Established.
In 1954, pianist Bud Powell turned 30, and the damage of hospitalizations, an excessive work schedule, and other strains and traumas of recent years began to take a toll on his playing. For the last 12 years of his life, Powell would be intermittently brilliant, and we'll hear some of those musical moments, along with commentary from Powell biographer Peter Pullman on The Scene Changes, The Life and Music of Bud Powell, Part 2, this week on Nightlights.
On All Things Considered, the world is brought to your car radio, smart speaker, and mobile phone. Hi, I'm Kenton McDonald, your local All Things Considered host on 88.3 WNIN. As we spend our afternoons together, enjoy local news, statewide news from Indiana Public Broadcasting, and national and international news from NPR. Join me Monday through Friday, 3 to 7, and thanks for your support.
Autumn in New York.
The leaves are changing from green to red. The air outside is brisk and cool. Autumn is upon us. And that means it's the time of year for Afterglow to salute some of the best songs about the fall from the Great American Songbook. I'm Mark Chilla, and join me for Songs of the Season, Autumn, this week on Afterglow.
It's the Friday wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Time now for the Weekend Notebook. And quite a few things happening around the tri-state this weekend. Let's start with tonight. It's Rumors ATL at the Victory Theater. It's a Fleetwood Mac tribute, and that group is bringing its tour to Evansville. The show starts at 7 this evening. Tickets range from $26.50 to $42. Again, that's Rumors ATL at the Victory Theater. That show starts at 7 this evening. Meanwhile, across the street, it's Parker McCollum at the Ford Center. That concert is happening at 7:30 this evening. Tickets start at $41.50. The Texas-based singer-songwriter is bringing his tour to Evansville. Opening acts for tonight's show are scheduled to be Chase Beckham and Kylie Morgan. Again, that's Parker McCollum, the headliner at the Ford Center. That show starts at 7:30 this evening. Moving on to tomorrow, Saturday, it's the Filthy Vintage Flea Market, Filthy spelled P-H-I-L-T-H-Y. That event will be held on the lawn of West Branch Library on Franklin Street from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Vendors will be selling vintage clothing, antiques, collectibles, and more. Again, that's the Filthy Vintage Flea Market scheduled for tomorrow, Saturday, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the lawn of the West Branch Library on West Franklin Street. Also happening tomorrow, it's the Fall Funk in the City. That's happening from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Arts on Haney's Corner. The art festival features more than 80 artists from the region, along with food vendors and live music. Now, Funk in the City says this is a rain or shine event. I know we have lots of rain in the forecast. Hopefully, these events can make it through the rain. Again, that's the Fall Funk in the City. It's a rain or shine event being held at Haney's Corner tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Also happening on your Saturday, it's the EVs for Everyone. That event is Saturday from noon until 4 at Evansville Day School on North Green River Road. The local nonprofit Tri-State Creation Care is hosting its third annual EV Cruise-In with test drives and ride-alongs. Auto dealers will bring various new EVs for adult attendees to test drive. EV owners will bring their own vehicles for the Cruise-In. The event also includes family activities, robotics demonstrations, interactive storytelling, live music, a DJ, food, also an inflatable 50-foot obstacle course, butterfly ambassadors, and nature crafts. That's all happening at the EVs for Everyone event from noon until 4 p.m. at Evansville Day School. That's on Saturday. That event is free and open to the public. Also happening on Saturday, we have another concert at the Victory Theater. It is Flogging Molly. This Celtic punk institution brings its show to Evansville. Flogging Molly is described as a band that can share the stage with the Chieftains one day and Motorhead the next. The show starts at 8 p.m. That's tomorrow evening at the Victory Theater. Tickets for Flogging Molly range from $39 to $72. Moving on to Sunday now, the Trinity United Methodist Church is celebrating its 200th anniversary on Sunday. The day begins with a tour of the historic church at 216 Southeast 3rd Street. That tour begins at 10:30 a.m. Later in the day, an organ recital is set for 2 p.m. Again, that's at Trinity United Methodist Church, celebrating its 200th anniversary with events at the historic church at 216 Southeast 3rd Street here in downtown Evansville. Happening Sunday afternoon, it's time for the Boca Big Band. The Big Band will be performing at the Boca Lounge at 2:30 p.m. It's the monthly performance of the Boca Big Band at the Boca Lounge. That begins at 2:30 Sunday afternoon at Boca. Well, I'd like to thank all of our guests on today's Friday Wrap, including Sarah Lesh of the Evansville Courier and Press. Thanks to WNIN's Tim Jagalow. Also, a thanks to WNIN's Kenton McDonald for his contribution today. A big thanks to Jevin Redmond, not only for joining us for the sports chat, but also for engineering today's show. Also, a big thanks to WNIN's Mariah Winnie for social media support. Thanks to Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations for their support. Also, a big thanks to listeners like yourself. Thank you for your support for making programs like the Friday Wrap on the air and online here at WNIN. I'd like to remind you this is WNIN FM, Evansville, Henderson, and Owensboro. With your support, we're building a better tri-state together. I'm John Gibson, wishing you and yours a good weekend. Stay dry, stay safe, and for this Friday, that's a wrap.